I sat there in the sweltering hallway of the Tuscaloosa County Courthouse, the air thick with humidity and frustration. The AC had been broken for 3 days, turning the place into a pressure cooker where everyone's temper simmered just below the surface. At 42, I'd learned to stay composed in worse conditions, desert heat in Kandahar, ambushes in Syria, but tonight, I was just Danielle Sterling, a black woman in a worn navy suit, waiting for my name to be called. No badges, no military ID tucked away. I wasn't here to prove anything yet. I kept my hands folded in my lap, eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor, breathing steadily like I'd trained myself to do during endless patrols. The door to the courtroom swung open, and a burly figure lumbered out. Rick Dalton, the white cop who'd pulled me over 2 weeks ago, about 50 years old with a gut straining against his uniform shirt. The stench of stale cigarettes and cheap coffee hit me before his voice did. "Move along, sweetheart," he barked at a passing clerk, then his eyes landed on me. He froze, a smirk twisting his ruddy face. "Sterling, right? Didn't think you'd show your face here. Figured you'd skip town like the rest of 'em." I lifted my chin slightly, keeping my voice even and measured. "I'm here to respect the law, Officer Dalton." He let out a guttural laugh, stepping closer, invading my space with his bulk. "The law? In this building, I am the law, girl. You think you can waltz in here and act like you're somebody?" My pulse quickened, but I didn't flinch. 2 weeks ago, I'd been driving back to visit my mother after a consulting gig in Birmingham. The road was pothole-riddled, and I swerved to avoid one, nothing reckless. Dalton's lights flashed behind me. "Reckless driving," he'd snarled, his flashlight blinding me as he demanded to search my car. "No warrant, no probable cause." "I have rights under the Fourth Amendment," I'd said calmly. That set him off. "You defying an officer?" He'd scribbled the ticket for failure to comply and obstructing justice, his pen slashing the paper like a weapon. Now, here he was, looming over me, eyes narrowing with that familiar mix of contempt and entitlement. "You got a mouth on you, don't ya? We'll see how that plays out in there." He jabbed a thumb toward the courtroom, where Judge Patterson, his drinking buddy, from what I'd heard, waited to rubber stamp whatever Dalton fed him. I didn't respond. There was no point in arguing with a man who'd already decided my worth based on my skin. But inside, the fire burned, the same resolve that had carried me through 3 tours, saving lives in Honduras and Afghanistan. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Not yet. As the bailiff called my name, Dalton followed me in, his heavy footsteps echoing like a predator stalking prey. The room was sparse, wooden benches filled with a mix of locals, mostly white, fanning themselves with case files. Patterson, a grizzled 60-year-old with wire-rimmed glasses, banged his gavel without looking up. "Sterling case. Let's make this quick." Dalton took the stand first, his voice booming with false authority. "She was swerving all over the road, Your Honor. When I asked to search, she got mouthy, refused. Clear obstruction." I stood when it was my turn, heart steady. "Your Honor, I avoided a pothole. I refused the search because it violated my constitutional rights." No warrant was presented. Patterson snorted, leaning back. "Who do you think you are, questioning an officer? Guilty. 24 hours in lockup." Dalton grinned, descending from the box to cuff me. He grabbed my arm roughly, yanking hard. "Time to learn your place." That's when he snapped. As I didn't budge fast enough for his liking, he reared back and drove his boot into my stomach, a sharp, vicious kick meant to fold me in half. Pain exploded through me, but instinct kicked in. I twisted just enough to deflect the full force, my body remembering the drills. Dalton overcommit, lost his balance, and tumbled forward, crashing to the floor with a thud that shook the room. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I raised my hands immediately. I didn't attack. I defended against unlawful assault. Patterson's face purpled. 48 hours. Bailiff, take her. But in that moment, as Dalton scrambled up, blood trickling from a split lip, I saw the first flicker of doubt in his eyes. He didn't know it yet, but he'd just kicked a hornet's nest. The courtroom erupted into chaos after Dalton hit the floor. Patterson's gavel slammed repeatedly, his voice booming over the murmurs. Order. I said order in my court. But I could see the panic in his eyes, the way he glanced at Dalton, his old pal, sprawled like a felled tree. I kept my hands raised high, palms open, showing no threat. At 42, after years of leading special ops teams through hellish firefights, I knew better than to escalate. Your Honor, I said steadily, I did not initiate violence. Officer Dalton assaulted me without cause during the cuffing process. Dalton pushed himself up, wheezing, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. She attacked me. You all saw it, she flipped me like some kind of freak. He pointed a trembling finger, blood smearing his chin from where he'd bitten his tongue on impact. The spectators shifted uncomfortably, a few whispering about the crazy black woman, but I caught one or two exchanging doubtful looks. Patterson leaned forward, his jowls quivering. Assault on an officer? That's another charge. Bailiff, get her out of here now. As two deputies approached cautiously, wary after what they'd just witnessed, I didn't resist. They cuffed me gently, almost apologetically, and led me toward the side door. But Dalton wasn't done. He stormed after us, barking at the deputies. Make sure she gets the full treatment in holding. No special favors for this one. This wasn't my first brush with a system rigged against people like me. 2 weeks ago, on that pothole-strewn highway outside Tuscaloosa, Dalton had pulled me over for reckless driving. I'd been heading to my mother's house, exhausted from a day advising on security protocols for a local firm, civilian work that paid the bills since I'd left the Navy. His lights had flashed aggressively, and he'd approached with hand on his holster. License and registration, he demanded, then added, and step out for a search. No warrant? I'd asked calmly. His eyes had narrowed. You questioning me? That's obstruction right there. The ticket had been a farce, laced with his bias. He'd seen a black woman in a modest car and assumed guilt. Now, in court, Patterson had barely glanced at my defense, dismissing my constitutional argument as mouthy nonsense. In the hallway, as they processed me, Dalton hovered like a vulture. You think you're smart, huh? Defying the law, then pulling that stunt? You'll rot for this. I met his gaze evenly. The law protects everyone, officer. Even from those who abuse it. He scoffed, but I saw the crack, the unease flickering as whispers spread about the unusual strength I'd shown. Little did he know, it was honed from commanding rescue ops in Honduras, where one wrong move meant lives lost. The accusation hung heavy, full of prejudice, but I held my ground. This was just the beginning. The deputies led me to holding, the door clanging shut behind me. Alone in the dim cell, I sat on the bench, ignoring the ache in my side from his boot. Patterson's verdict echoed in my mind, guilty without evidence, based on Dalton's word alone. It was a textbook case of systemic rot, where a black woman's rights evaporated under the weight of a white man's ego. But I wasn't broken. I'd faced worse in the deserts of Afghanistan, staring down Taliban ambushes. Here, in this concrete box, I planned. Kendra had texted earlier, help's coming. And that video from the courtroom? It was already out there, seeds of truth sprouting in the digital wild. Dalton thought he'd won with his trumped-up charge. He had no idea the storm he'd unleashed. The courtroom's stunned silence shattered as deputies hauled me toward the holding area, my wrists now bound in cold steel. Patterson's verdict still rang in my ears, guilty on flimsy grounds, his bias as evident as Dalton's boot print blooming into a bruise on my abdomen. At 42, I'd endured IED blasts and sniper fire, but this pain felt different, a deliberate strike from a system designed to crush people like me. I walked steadily, ignoring the twinge with each step, my military training keeping my expression neutral. Dalton trailed us, his heavy breathing ragged from the fall. "You got lucky in there," he snarled, close enough that I could feel his spittle on my neck. "But in holding? That's my domain. No cameras, no witnesses. You'll learn respect the hard way." I didn't glance back. "Respect is earned, officer. Not demanded with force." The deputies exchanged uneasy looks, one younger, maybe mid-20s, hesitated before shoving me into the cell. The door clanged shut, echoing down the sterile corridor. Alone, I leaned against the wall, assessing the damage, ribs tender but intact, no internal bleeding from what I could tell. My mind raced back to that highway stop, the real origin of this mess. Dalton hadn't just ticketed me, he'd seen my calm refusal as defiance, a black woman daring to know her rights. "You people always think you're above the law," he'd muttered then, his words dripping with the same contempt now. But in that moment of isolation, something shifted. Whispers filtered through the bars, courthouse staff gossiping about the freakish takedown. "Did you see how she flipped him? Like some kind of pro." "Nah, she's just another troublemaker." Their voices carried the weight of prejudice, dismissing me as an anomaly rather than questioning Dalton's aggression. I closed my eyes, drawing on memories of command, leading raids in Syria, where one hesitation could cost lives. This wasn't a battlefield, but the stakes felt personal. Kendra's warning to Dalton echoed in my head. She'd tried to clue him in, but his ego had blocked it. Now, as pain throbbed in my side, I knew the video from that student intern was my unseen ally. It would expose the truth, not my violence, but his unlawful assault. Dalton appeared at the bars minutes later, smirking through the pain of his own bruises. "Comfortable? Enjoy it while it lasts. By morning, you'll be begging for mercy." I met his gaze, unblinking. "Mercy is for those who deserve it. What you did was assault a citizen exercising her rights." He laughed, but it cracked, uncertainty creeping in. He didn't know the half of it. My past as a Navy commander, the medals buried in a drawer at home, the lives I'd saved in Honduras, they'd all come to light soon. For now, I sat in silence, the cell's chill seeping in, but my resolve burned hotter. This wasn't over. It was just the first strike in a war he'd started, and one I was trained to win. The morning after my courtroom takedown of Dalton, unintentional as it was, dawned with a harsh fluorescent buzz in the holding cell. My side ached from his boot, a dull throb that reminded me of shrapnel wounds from a botched op in Afghanistan, but I pushed it aside. Sleep had been fitful on the hard bench, but I'd used the time to strategize. Kendra's network, the video evidence, the cracks in their facade. The unfairness of the trial gnawed at me, not just Patterson's snap judgment, but how the system had twisted my self-defense into aggression. A guard unlocked the door around 8 a.m., his face neutral but eyes avoiding mine. "Sterling, you're up for arraignment review. Judge wants to clarify yesterday's mess." I stood slowly, cuffs rattling, and followed him back to the same courtroom. The air was still stifling, but now charged with whispers from the gallery, more people than before, some with phones out, others shooting sidelong glances. Word had spread overnight. Patterson looked haggard, his robe rumpled as if he'd slept in it. Dalton stood off to the side, bandaged chin and all, glaring daggers. "This hearing is to address the incident," Patterson intoned, avoiding eye contact with me. "Officer Dalton claims assault. Defendant, your statement?" I stepped forward, voice steady despite the pain. "Your Honor, I did not assault anyone. Officer Dalton initiated physical force during restraint, kicking me without provocation. I merely evaded to protect myself, per standard self-defense protocols." Dalton exploded from his spot. "Lies. She threw me like some judo expert. Your Honor, she's dangerous, resisting arrest, now this? Lock her up longer. Patterson nodded curtly, not probing Dalton's actions. No questions about why a routine cuffing turned violent. No review of protocols. The gallery murmured, but he silenced them with a gavel strike. Evidence supports the officer. Sentence stands at 48 hours, plus community service. Next case. It was a farce, a trial where facts bent to favoritism. As deputies led me out again, Dalton leaned in close. See? The system's got my back. Yours? Not a chance. But as we passed the hallway, I caught sight of the student intern from yesterday, huddled with a phone, nodding to a friend. His video had captured everything, Dalton's kick, my dodge, his fall. It was already viral, racking up views while this kangaroo court ignored it. Kendra's words to Dalton replayed in my mind, she'd warned him, but prejudice deafened him. Back in the cell, isolation hit harder. This wasn't justice, it was a rigged game where my skin predetermined guilt. Yet, as notifications buzzed faintly from a guard's phone outside, news alerts about courthouse assault video, I knew the tide was turning. They hadn't listened to warnings, but the camera had seen it all. And soon, the world would too. As the deputies marched me back down the dim corridor toward holding, the weight of the cuffs bit into my wrists, but it was nothing compared to the fire building inside. Dalton's parting words echoed, my domain, no cameras, but I knew better. Cameras were everywhere now, even in places people pretended they weren't. My side throbbed with every step, the bruise from his boot spreading like ink under my skin, yet I kept my posture straight, chin level. Discipline wasn't optional, it was survival. Halfway down the hall, a familiar figure stepped out from a side door, Sergeant Kendra Ellis, still in plain clothes, her dark eyes sharp and steady. She was 45, built like she could still run a 10-mile ruck march, and we'd shared foxholes in Yemen when I was still commanding. She moved with purpose, blocking the deputies just enough to speak low. Danielle, she said, voice calm but edged. You good? I gave the slightest nod. Bruised. Not broken. Kendra turned her gaze to Dalton, who had followed us like a shadow, smirking despite the swelling on his jaw. She stepped closer to him, lowering her voice so only we could hear. You have no idea who you just put your boot into, Dalton. She's not just some woman you pulled over. Commander Danielle Sterling, Navy SEALs, 3 combat tours, saved my entire platoon in Kandahar when the Taliban had us pinned. She dragged me out under fire while I was bleeding out. You just assaulted a recipient of the Navy Cross and the Distinguished Service Medal. Dalton's smirk faltered for a split second, then hardened again. I don't care if she's Jesus reincarnated. She resisted. She embarrassed me in open court. In my town, that means consequences. Kendra didn't blink. Your town? Last I checked, the Constitution still applies here. And when the Pentagon gets wind of this, and they will, because that video is already spreading, you're not facing a local slap on the wrist. You're facing federal scrutiny. Assault on a decorated veteran? That's career-ending. Dalton laughed, but it sounded forced. You threatening me, Sergeant? Not threatening, Kendra said quietly. Warning. You kicked a hero. The world is about to find out. And when they do, no judge in Alabama is going to cover for you. She stepped back, giving me a quick look, pride mixed with worry, then melted back into the crowd of courthouse staff pretending not to watch. The deputies resumed walking me forward, but their grips had loosened, almost respectful now. Dalton stood frozen for a moment, face flushing deeper than the bruise on his chin. As the cell door clanged shut behind me again, I sat on the bench and exhaled slowly. Kendra had planted the seed. Dalton thought he could bury this with bravado and backroom favors, but he'd just kicked the wrong door open. Outside, I could hear muffled voices, guards checking phones, the low buzz of notifications. The video was moving fast. I leaned my head against the cold concrete wall and closed my eyes. The ache in my ribs was nothing compared to the certainty settling in my chest. They hadn't listened to warnings before. But they would listen now, whether they wanted to or not. The cell door had barely clanged shut behind me when the murmurs started filtering through the corridor like smoke. I sat on the metal bench, back straight despite the fire in my ribs, and listened. The guards weren't even trying to keep quiet anymore. "Yo, you see that video?" one said, voice low but carrying. "The one from the courtroom?" Kid in the back row caught the whole thing, Dalton kicking her square in the gut, then her flipping him like he weighed nothing. Another guard chuckled nervously. "Man, he's gonna lose his badge over this. She's not just anybody. Words out, she's ex-Navy, Special Ops. Saved a whole platoon in Kandahar. Medal of Honor level stuff." I closed my eyes for a second, letting the words sink in. The student intern's footage had done what Kendra's warning couldn't, it had gone public. No filter, no spin, just raw truth captured on a shaky phone camera. I pictured it spreading, first a few shares among courthouse staff, then to friends, then exploding across social media. By now, the caption was probably something simple and brutal: "Cop assaults black woman in court, turns out she's a decorated veteran." Views climbing, comments flooding, outrage building. From my spot in the cell, I heard footsteps approaching, quick, purposeful. A young deputy, the same one who'd hesitated earlier, stopped outside the bars. He looked barely 25, nervous energy radiating off him. "Ma'am. Sterling? It's blowing up. The video's at like 50,000 views already. People are tagging the Pentagon, the NAACP, local news stations. Reporters are outside the courthouse asking for statements." I nodded once. "Thank you for telling me." He shifted his weight. I looked you up after Kendra said something. Your service record, it's insane. 3 combat deployments, citations for valor. And they treated you like that? It ain't right. It never is, I said quietly. But cameras don't lie. They just show what people refuse to see. He glanced down the hall, then back at me. Dalton's in the break room losing his mind. Keep saying it's a misunderstanding, but even the chief's on the phone with higher-ups. They're talking internal affairs already. I allowed myself the smallest exhale of relief. The system had ignored my rights in that courtroom, dismissed my defense, amplified Dalton's lies. But one phone recording had shifted the balance. No speeches needed, no pleas, just evidence doing what words alone couldn't. As the deputy walked away, his radio crackled with updates, more media at the front entrance. Pentagon press office just called for confirmation. I leaned my head against the wall, the cold concrete grounding me. The ache in my body was real, but so was the momentum building outside these bars. They hadn't listened when Kendra warned Dalton. They hadn't listened when I cited my constitutional rights. But the camera had spoken, and now the whole world was forced to hear. In the silence of the cell, I felt something settle, not anger, not triumph, but certainty. The truth was loose, and once it started running, no badge or gavel could stop it. The next morning, sunlight sliced through the narrow window of the holding cell like a blade, but it brought no warmth. My ribs still burned from Dalton's kick, a constant reminder that this wasn't over. I'd spent the night mapping every detail in my head, the courtroom layout, the deputy's hesitant grips, Kendra's warning. Sleep had come in fragments, interrupted by the distant buzz of phones and muffled arguments in the corridor. The video was out there now, gaining traction like wildfire in dry grass. Around 9 a.m., the guard who'd spoken to me earlier, the young one with the sister in Afghanistan, opened the door. His face was pale, eyes wide. "Sterling, they're moving you to the Federal Liaison Office." Someone from DC is on the line. Big brass. I stood slowly, cuffs clinking. Federal liaison? He nodded, almost reverent. Yeah. Pentagon called. They want a full report. Word is, the video hit their press desk overnight. They're not happy. They escorted me through a side door I hadn't noticed before, down a sterile hallway lined with faded posters about courthouse etiquette. We entered a small conference room with a single table, a speakerphone, and a laptop already open. The screen showed a secure video link. On the other end sat Colonel Michael Crenshaw, 55, still sharp-eyed despite the years since Yemen. He'd been a captain back then, leading the platoon I'd pulled out of an ambush. Now he commanded the Office of Warrior Care Policy at the Pentagon. Danielle, he said, voice steady but laced with fury. I saw the footage. Every frame. Are you injured? Bruised ribs, sir. Nothing broken. I've had worse. He leaned closer to the camera. This is unacceptable. Dalton assaulted a decorated veteran in open court. Patterson rubber-stamped it. We're already coordinating with DOJ Civil Rights Division. Internal Affairs is scrambling, but we're not waiting for them. I exhaled slowly. Sir, I didn't want this to blow up. I just wanted a fair hearing. Crenshaw's jaw tightened. You didn't start this fire, Danielle. They did. That kick wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. And the fact they ignored your service record? That's systemic. We're pulling strings to get you released within the hour. Kendra's already en route with documentation, your DD-214, citations, the works. The media's circling the courthouse. Reporters from CNN, MSNBC, local affiliates. They want your side. I glanced at the guard standing by the door. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd just realized he was in the room with history. Sir, tell them the truth. I defended myself. I didn't attack. And I won't be used as a prop. Crenshaw nodded. Understood. But Danielle, this isn't just about you anymore. It's about every service member who's been dismissed, profiled, or worse. We're turning this into a teachable moment. Mandatory bias training for that department, full review of Patterson's docket. Dalton's suspension is already in motion. The call ended with a click. The guard cleared his throat. Ma'am, they're processing your release now. Chief's orders. As they uncuffed me, I felt the shift, the air in the building had changed. Whispers followed me down the hall, Pentagon's involved. She's the real deal. Dalton was nowhere in sight, probably hiding in some office, watching his career unravel on live feeds. I stepped into the hallway, free but not yet finished. The truth had finally caught up, and it moved faster than any badge or gavel. Back in the holding cell after Crenshaw's call, the door clanged shut once more, but the atmosphere felt different, charged, like the calm before a storm breaks. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the concrete walls, and my ribs protested with every breath. Release was coming, Crenshaw had promised, but waiting in this box tested even my patience. I'd commanded ops where delays meant death, yet here I sat, caged for daring to defend myself against a bully in uniform. Footsteps approached, hesitant, not the heavy bootfalls of the deputies. It was the young guard again, the one with the sister in Afghanistan. He stopped at the bars, glancing over his shoulder before speaking low. Ma'am. Commander Sterling? Everyone's talking now. The video's everywhere, millions of views. They're calling you a hero online. Hashtag Justice for Sterling is trending. I looked up, meeting his eyes. He couldn't have been more than 26, fresh-faced with that mix of awe and guilt. What else are they saying? He swallowed hard. That you saved lives overseas. My sister, she served 2 tours. She texted me your name from some old briefing. Said you led the extraction in Yemen that pulled her unit out. The ghost commander, they called you. Quiet, deadly efficient. I didn't know. None of us did. The words hit like a wave, validation mixed with the bitter sting of irony. All those years risking everything for this country, and in my own backyard, I was reduced to defendant because of my skin. Your sister survived because good people did their jobs, I said evenly. That's all I ever asked for here. He nodded, voice cracking. They shouldn't have treated you like this. Dalton, he's holed up in the chief's office, yelling about lawsuits. But the chief's not backing him anymore. Federal pressure's mounting. Outside the cell, voices rose in the corridor, staff huddled around phones, whispers turning to exclamations. She's the one who took down that Taliban cell in Honduras? Saved 19 Marines? And they locked her up for self-defense? The gossip spread like ripples, eroding the narrative Dalton and Patterson had built. No one ignored it now, the truth demanded attention. I leaned back against the wall, the cold seeping through my suit. Pain radiated from my side, but it fueled my resolve. Crenshaw was mobilizing, Kendra en route, the machinery was turning. Yet in this moment, alone with the echoes of respect finally filtering in, I felt the weight of every overlooked veteran like me. Black, female, decorated, but invisible until forced into the light. The young guard lingered. They're processing your release. Orders from above. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, I replied. Be better. Next time, see the person before the prejudice. He nodded, walking away with a straighter spine. The cell felt less confining now. The walls were cracking, and soon, the whole facade would come down. As the young guard walked away, the corridor outside my cell erupted into frantic activity, phones ringing, voices rising in panic. I sat still, the concrete wall cool against my back, but my ears strained to catch every word. The video had done its work, whispers of my service record were turning into shouts. Then came a raised voice from down the hall, unmistakable even through the walls, Dalton, bellowing at someone. I pieced it together from the fragments drifting in. Dalton had gathered with his superiors in a conference room, scrambling to contain the narrative, spin the video as my aggression, bury it under claims of resistance. It's just a routine stop gone wrong, he was reportedly saying. She's nobody, some mouthy defendant making trouble. But the meeting shattered when a phone call came through on speaker, direct from the Department of Defense liaison. The voice on the line was clipped, authoritative. Officer Rick Dalton? This concerns the individual you assaulted in Tuscaloosa County Court yesterday, Danielle Sterling. Former Navy commander, recipient of the Navy Cross and Distinguished Service Medal. Led critical rescue operations in Syria, Afghanistan, and Honduras. Saved 19 lives under fire in Kandahar alone. Your actions are now under federal review for assault on a decorated veteran. The room went dead silent. Then Dalton's voice, choked and disbelieving, I didn't know. She didn't say anything about being military. I thought she was just another black defendant, you know, the usual type causing problems. The liaison cut him off coldly. That's precisely the issue, officer. Your assumption nearly cost this department a national scandal. Media's en route, CNN, Fox, local affiliates. The Pentagon is issuing a statement. Standby for suspension pending investigation. Murmurs exploded afterward, staff repeating Dalton's words in horror. He said, just another black defendant? On a recorded line? The chief's voice boomed, distancing himself. Dalton, you're on administrative leave effective immediately. Get out before the cameras arrive. Back in my cell, the young guard returned, face flushed. You hear that? Dalton's done. He admitted on the call, he didn't see you as anything but, well, you know. The whole building's turning on him. Reporters are flooding the front steps, demanding your release and a statement. I nodded slowly, the irony settling like dust. All this time, my medals gathered dust in a drawer at home because I didn't need to flaunt them to live my life. But Dalton's prejudice had forced the truth into the open, too late for him to undo the damage. The cell door buzzed open minutes later. Freedom tasted close, but the real shift was deeper. They knew who I was now. And it terrified them.